Hi kids. Today we're going to talk about succession. There are two successions, primary and secondary succession. All succession starts with basically zeroing a community back, or if there was no community at all. So the difference in primary and secondary is primary is going from bare rock and going to where you have soil and you can grow an entire vegetative community or ecosystem. What we're looking at today is two different forms of secondary succession. What has set us back to have to start over. You look in the background, you'll see a bunch of root balls sticking out where trees have fallen. That's the result of Hurricane Laura that came through and visited us about a year and a half ago. And it threw all of these trees down. Out where I work on Fort Johnson, there's parts of that place that it put every tree on the ground and we had to start all over. Then more recently, we had a drought this year and we had a real bad wildfire. And the wildfire at where we are right here on this property burned and killed all of the trees. And if you look down at the ground, there's nothing left. So we're going to have to start over. So what is important about succession is there are steps that happen. The first thing that happens with primary succession, I'm going to run through it real quick and then we'll come back to this secondary, is with primary you start with your bare rock and then you have lichens. Lichens break down the rock itself, so the rock has to be broken down to soil. After the lichens, then you start out with annual grasses and forbs. Those annual grasses and forbs will then turn into perennial. You'll turn into a forested community if you're able to. And that will either be in the United States a deciduous or coniferous forest. And a coniferous forest is one that is mainly pines or evergreens. A deciduous forest is like oak and hickory. So your climax community for most of the United States will be one of those two types of forests, unless you're on the Great Plains, and then it'll be grasses. And that's because there the fires burned frequently enough that the climax community was actually perennial grasses. For secondary succession, what has happened is we zeroed back, but we still had our soil. So the first thing that's going to show back up here in our succession is annual forbs and grasses. After those annual forbs and grasses, we'll have perennial forbs and grasses, and will be the start of trees, and then that will go into a coniferous forest. Mature pine trees is what our climax is. What's interesting about Southwest Louisiana and East Texas is that the climax community is a fire-tolerant longleaf pine ecosystem. So that ecosystem requires fire to maintain it, and the big trees can survive in the fire. These trees did survive because we were in a drought and they were not the native species. So when the fire got hot and got to the top, it burned them all up and killed them. A fire climax community requires that the forest be burned every 3 or 4 years so that fires are not disastrous and don't set us back to restart our succession. So when we stopped last time, we were in a forest that had been burned out. We moved over to show you how the succession really gets started. What we're looking at here, if you look down through here, you can see the bare ground. This ground was actually disturbed by machinery as they were doing a project. And what you see is no big plants of any sort. You see a whole lot of different forbs, like this right here, that are getting started. This crabgrass, which is an annual grass. All of these are annual plants. And the reason, if you get down and you really start looking, you see more popping up. This is your first succession and secondary succession. People call these weeds, but a weed is only a plant where you don't want it. And so in your garden, because you tilled up your garden every year, annuals get started. That's how we come up with the term weed. But they're really just annuals, and the way that God made things is He was making these come up to hold the soil until a plant that can live longer takes root. These come up and grow quick, but they die quick, and their roots hold the soil together. The mid-level of succession, your perennial grasses and forbs, those will live 3 or 4 years, but they take longer to get established. And then, of course, your trees and shrubs come up. They're slow getting started, but they're long-lived. And so I'm going to show you in just a minute a woolly croton. That's a type of plant. It's also called goatweed or doveweed. And this is a seed that I pulled off of one just a while ago. And actually, this seed breaks into there were actually 3 seeds in this seed head. And you can see the size of those seeds. This plant right here, when it's mature, the dove love to eat it. It will set in the ground for 50 to 100 years until the next disturbance. And then all of a sudden the plant's there again. And so the way God has made these annuals is he makes them a big heavy seed that can be there to restart things when disturbance happens, when your succession needs to start again.
So this is the woolly croton I was telling you about. This is the plant that will set in the ground for years. This came up earlier this year. Look at the amount of seed it's putting out. And then the way God engineered this is it's going to cast this seeds out. This pan over there, the pine forest like this behind us is going to come back in here, and this will be waiting for the next time this soil is disturbed, even up to 100 years. So this specific one is called woolly croton. One more time, let me show you the side of these seeds, because if you like dove hunting, kids, you find a field of this in the fall. If it came up early, those dove are going to be all over that seed eating it. We found another patch of the woolly croton. It's a bigger patch that I'm down in, and it gives me the opportunity to talk about disturbance. So it doesn't matter if it is a natural disaster such as a hurricane, a tornado, a flood, those sorts of things that take all of the vegetation off the landscape, or if it's man-made, which is where we've been finding the woolly croton today, and that can be from forestry activities where we are. In this case, it was a pipeline project where they were taking natural gas from one place to another. But regardless of whether it's man-made or natural, succession has to occur for us to get back to our climax community.